marijuana does not cause long-term cognitive impairment. Yes, people who use marijuana temporarily display a diminished capacity to learn and recall new information, but this diminishment only lasts for the duration of the intoxication. There's no convincing evidence that heavy long-term marijuana use permanently impairs memory or other cognitive functions.
You know, we're all born ignorant. But at some point in your life, you have to stop blaming the school you went to, stop blaming the church you were raised in, the religion your parents forced on you as a kid. At some point, you have to stop blaming others for your ignorance and take responsibility for it yourself. Now, in the era of the internet, now more than ever before, ignorance is voluntary. People are ignorant because they choose to be ignorant. I meet and talk to people who act like they have no idea that broccoli is healthy and that eating eggs and cheese is unhealthy. They just have no idea. And it's like, would that really be a 5-minute Google search away? But the internet presents us with an almost infinite array of possible sources of information. And our attention span is finite. The amount we can choose to learn from is very finite indeed. So what do we choose? Well, we often choose, we speaking for humanity collectively here, we often choose what the information that comes in attractive packaging and that's telling us something we already want to hear. Jacqueline Glenn, for many years, has been getting hundreds of thousands of viewers because she's got attractive packaging and she delivers you hard-hitting messages like the claim that marijuana doesn't cause any brain damage at all. Now here, by contrast, here's some bad news in a plain brown package. It's an unappealing package, and it's telling you something you don't want to hear. I'm going to tell you the source I'm quoting in just a moment, but pretend for a moment you don't know the source and I don't know the source. Pretend you're just encountering this as a scrap of text floating around the internet with no idea what kind of authority it comes from, and pretend there are no other sources available to allow me to prove to you that Jacqueline Glenn is wrong, that Jacqueline Glenn has been lying, that in fact marijuana does cause brain damage. What would you make? What would you make of this claim? I think there's something about the very structure and nature of the information being presented here. There's something about it that demands to be taken seriously. Quote, our study demonstrates a pattern of gray matter volume changes in a group of regular cannabis users compared with a group of occasional ones. Just an interesting note, everyone who participated in the study was age 19 to age 29. So there were no effects on the brain here of old age or other cumulative habits over many years. Interesting choice for the study design. Regular users exhibit a decrease in gray matter volume in the medial temporal cortex, temporal pole, parahippocampal gyrus, left insula, and orbitofrontal cortex. I'm not a brain surgeon. I'm not. Let me ask you in the audience, if I hadn't struggled to pronounce the different parts of the human brain there, do you think any of you would have just felt comfortable with marijuana causing brain damage, with marijuana causing the loss of gray matter in just some parts of the brain and not others? Was there anyone in the audience who was sitting there thinking, okay, the temporal cortex, temporal pole, that I can live with. That's no problem. But wait a minute. It causes brain damage also in the orbitofrontal cortex. Okay, forget it. I'm out. Okay, now I'm going to take this seriously, guys. Now I'm going to quit smoking marijuana. Before, the first 4 or 5 parts of the brain you mentioned being damaged by marijuana, that I was cool with, but not that last cortex. That was one cortex too many. That was a bridge too far. I don't see it. I mean, there are people who decide to smoke cigarettes and they feel a disconnect, like, well, that does damage to my lungs, but somehow it doesn't do damage to me, like as if who I am and my lungs are two really separable things. They drink alcohol and they think it just damages their kidney and their liver, and they say they're comfortable with whatever happens to their kidney and liver, as if, my kidney and my liver, that's not who I really am, that's not really me. Your brain is who you really are, bro. There's no way anyone could say they were at peace with just some parts of their brain being horribly damaged, horribly impaired by marijuana, having structural changes to their brain. I don't think anyone's comfortable with any one of these locations of the brain being damaged by marijuana. Maybe I'm wrong. Send me email, guys. I'm waiting for that to come in. All right, so we continue here. These changes strongly correlate with the monthly frequency of cannabis use in the 3 months before inclusion in the study. Specifically, significant gray matter atrophy can occur either with a heavy cannabis consumption independent of the age of first use or with recreational consumption that started during adolescence before the age of 18.
There's no convincing evidence that heavy long-term marijuana use permanently impairs memory or other cognitive functions. Then we have the next segment, which is where the psychiatrist comes in, and this is my favorite part because she speaks so much bullshit that's going to take me forever to cover, so I'm going to try to sum it up. But she starts off by saying, marijuana is actually not good for you. Then she goes on to say that if you smoke at a young age, you have a higher incidence of psychosis and psychotic disorders, and that it alters myelinization of the brain cells, and that the brain continues developing through your early 20s. Therefore, if you affect the myelinization of brain cells before this point, you have permanent brain damage after. Now, she is right that marijuana can have detrimental effects to children with developing brains and certain people with latent schizophrenia or other disorders, but so does alcohol, so does Big Gulp, so do peanuts, and a plethora of other things that I could probably come up with that aren't good for you. However, her claims about demyelinization are factually incorrect. Cannabinoid receptors are actually indicated in the treatment of demyelinating diseases. This woman obviously has some preconceived notions about cannabis and how it's bad for you, and she's grouping pieces of information together to support her argument.
I am not going to trivialize the problem by claiming that Jacqueline Glenn is just a pretty face. You can see that the message she's delivering is much more dangerous. It's much more harmful because she is wrapping herself in the cloak of skepticism. Her audience is supposedly comprised of skeptics. And yet this is the most dangerous kind of pseudoscience. What she's presenting, it's more dangerous precisely because it has more of a resemblance to real and credible science. And it's presented to you in appealing packaging. How can we expect the fine publishers over at Nature to compete? Well, look at what they're managing to put out here. Neuropsychopharmacology. Come on, that's a journal. Nobody can even spell the title. It's a terrible name for a journal. How are you going to sell any copies on newsstands with a title like that? Yeah, well, it's a respectable peer-reviewed journal. That's what I was quoting before. And that's what I'm interested in quoting again. Our findings corroborate several animal studies, adding evidence that the duration of exposure to cannabis is indeed associated with localized volume reduction in regions rich in CB1 receptors, correlating with the amount of cannabis used. Let me just emphasize here. Volume. doesn't mean they're turning down the volume in the brain. It's not about sound here, okay? Localized volume reduction. That's talking about the actual shrinkage of lobes of the brain, okay? The loss of gray matter being visible as shrinking hemispheres of the brain, shall we say? Continue our quotation here. The progression of a long-term exposure to drugs toward the development of substance use disorders and addictive behaviors is often associated with deficits in decision-making. fMRI, fMRI is a type of brain scan, demonstrates altered brain activity in core regions linked to the motivational and affective aspects of decision-making, mainly in the ventromedial prefrontal cortex and the orbitofrontal cortices and insula. In this regard, it has been demonstrated that substance-dependent individuals and patients with VMPFC lesions exhibit similar behaviors that lead them to make similar decisions in real life, preferring choices that bring immediate benefits, even if coupled with negative consequences. All right, let's just pause. So what they're saying here is the type of brain damage they have proven marijuana to cause. It doesn't just show up in a brain scan on a computer screen down at the hospital. It's also evident in changes in human behavior in the types of decisions people make. We continue. In our study, we complement the functional evidence of altered activity in nodes related to decision making by showing in regular cannabis users a decrease in gray matter volume in the insula and precuneus, this is a word I can't even guess how to pronounce, regions that are part of the motivational and affective components of this network. Let me tell you something. However you pronounce it, that is not a part of your brain that you want to shrink and have gray matter loss and permanent impairment and structural changes in. I don't think there are any parts of your brain you'd want that in. Quote, in addition to the changes in the polar regions, there are also changes in the medial temporal cortex, which is one of the structures often reported to be associated with cannabis addiction, and where we find a strong bilateral decrease in gray matter volume in the population of regular cannabis users. Such a pattern of atrophy has also been described in other forms of addiction, such as alcohol addiction, but not in heroin users. However, other patients with severe non-toxic behavioral addiction, such as pathological gambling, do not present the same form of atrophy, suggesting that temporal atrophy is indeed associated with cannabis consumption rather than addictive behavior itself. Despite the fact that the neurobiological interpretation of this volume reduction, so again, volume reduction, the shrinking in size of parts of your brain, that's what we're talking about here. Despite the fact that the neurobiological interpretation of this volume reduction is still unclear, studies on rodents give some clues on this point. Scalat et al. Back in 1987 found a THC-induced decrease in the mean volume of hippocampal neurons and a 44% reduction in the number of synapses up to 7 months after exposure. In relation to gray matter volume reduction in regions linked to affective and emotional processes described so far, the insula and the orbitofrontal cortex, we also show structural variations in the temporal pole. To our knowledge, ours is the first study showing gray matter atrophy in the temporal pole in regular cannabis users and the degree of atrophy related to the frequency of drug use in the 3 months preceding inclusion in the study. So let's pause here. This already gives you the sense that this is not the only peer-reviewed study I could be quoting. I have in the past put up a video that's nothing but me reading out peer-reviewed studies. But it seems like no matter how many sources I've got, no matter how the evidence stacks up, no matter how many new publications brag that they've found yet more evidence of yet another specific type of brain damage being caused by cannabis, by marijuana, by THC, that's really what we're talking about here. It seems like people will instead opt for the form of information that makes excuses for their bad habits that comes in the pretty packaging. And guys, I confronted Mike the Vegan with this. Mike the Vegan is university educated as a health educator, health expert. He supposedly does science-based health education videos. He's 100% committed to living a lie on this issue. He's out there encouraging people to get brain damage. Just like Jacqueline Glenn. Little slip there. But don't you want to take down your videos when your supposedly scientific arguments have been debunked as pseudoscience? And when you could have, at any point in these last 10 years, just done a couple of Google searches, challenged your own biased assumptions, and found out that no, there really is hard evidence that marijuana causes brain damage? Shouldn't you feel some sense of responsibility for giving this bad advice to people? Vegan Gains. You guys know I used to talk to him. Then he threatened to sue me and we stopped talking. Vegan Gains out there claiming to be a man of science. He doesn't care. He consistently lies on this issue. He lies to himself and he lies to others. And a lot of people out there, including Ask Yourself, they make it seem like marijuana is a harmless recreational activity. And the scientific evidence says otherwise. Okay, so to conclude here, in our study, we provide new arguments about the effects of long-term exposure to cannabis on brain structure integrity. Do you value your brain structure integrity enough to quit smoking marijuana? I think most people have more of a sentimental attachment to the integrity of their brain structure than they have to their lungs, their kidney, their liver. Maybe I'm way off here. It's a sentimental decision, really. It's up to you. It's up to you, guys. It's legal now. So, your choice. We were able to support all the hypotheses raised in the introduction. 1, we demonstrate that regular cannabis use is associated with reduced gray matter volume in regions rich in cannabinoid CB1 receptors that are functionally linked to motivational, emotional, and affective processing. Those processes, they're a significant portion of what we might call your personality or who you are. It's a pretty significant part of your daily brain function. We're not even getting into memory here. Another proven problem with marijuana use. 2, we complete our findings by showing that the magnitude of changes in these regions correlates with the frequency of cannabis use. And 3, is modulated by the age at which consumption was initiated. The choice is yours, but I'd invite you to really question why it is you're making the choice. Jacqueline Glenn is an attractive woman. I mean, a lot of my viewers make fun of me because I'm very stingy when it comes to handing out compliments. And indeed, I just see no reason to participate in this 21st century culture of handing out compliments to everyone all the time, telling everybody they're beautiful. The people who really are beautiful don't need to hear that they're beautiful. The people who aren't beautiful don't need to be flattered either. It's demeaning to everyone, no matter which way the compliment game goes. But yes, Jacqueline Glenn is a good-looking woman. And you know, men do foolish things for good-looking women all the time. With this latest controversy with the Prime Minister of Canada wearing blackface, the question I want to ask is, who are these 2 women in the photograph with him? What were they thinking? They're into it. I mean, was he dressing up in blackface to impress these chicks? I mean, what? Was he just hanging out at the party? I don't know. I mean, obviously, of course, he's going to bear the blame for this. But I have to wonder if this falls into the category of amazingly stupid things that men do trying to make a positive impression on women. Where are those 2 women now? I don't know. In any case, you know, there's a huge range of terrible, lamentable, awful human behavior that's motivated by, you know, the desire to just be around attractive people, even if you're not seducing them. You know, heterosexual women want to be around other attractive heterosexual women, and heterosexual men have their own reasons, obviously. There's a very strange effect on the ego and on the course of reasoning that physical beauty seems to have on people. Guys, this is nothing to play with. This is not gossip. This is not drama. This is brain damage. If we can't take this seriously, set aside our own biases, and learn truth from facts, what can we do?